And welcome to the Matrix Report on this 9th day of May 2017, and I am your host, Danny Searle. This is my first podcast and I hope to keep them coming, but I will need your support, and more on that later. So basically the format will be in two halves. The first part is the latest news from the world from deep within the Matrix, and I'll give you some of my analysis. In part two, I will talk about different topics and things that I feel important about for everyone to understand. I'll also use that part as well to give you updates on my latest projects and live speaking events and stuff like that. Anyway, so getting straight into it, the news today I think is critically important. However, I doubt you're going to hear about this in the mainstream media, so that's why I'm presenting it here. So recently the IMF, that's the International Monetary Fund, released a report called Global Financial Stability Report, Getting the Policy Mix Right, April 2017. And I'll give you links in the description for all these reports and things, so don't worry too much about looking for them now. So this report paints a very bleak picture about the coming financial collapse. So for this episode, I would like to focus just on this article alone, as I need to give you a bit of background. So this is going to take a little bit of time, just so you can get a better understanding about what's going on and where it's all coming from. So the first thing we need to understand is a thing called Glass-Steagall. And what Glass-Steagall was, it was a policy that was introduced by the Roosevelt government in 1933. It was created by Senator Carter Glass and Representative Henry B. Steagall. And it was basically designed to break up the big banks way back then. So the Great Depression was the cause of why they came up with this particular act, right? Because that was in 1928-29. So to avoid another disaster like that, they thought we need to come up with a solution, and therefore they sat down and they worked this out. So basically the Glass-Steagall Act separates the legitimate, normal, what they call boring banking, which is, loans, mortgages, that sort of stuff. And they separate that from the speculative merchant and investment banking. So basically it stops the banks from using, workers' superannuation, retirement funds and your paychecks that go into your bank account. It stops them from using that to bet on the stock exchange, basically, speculative. And that's effectively what they do. Right. So this was all going along nicely, and the banks couldn't get at your funds until 1999. And that's when the completely corrupt and compromised serial rapist Bill Clinton repealed the act. Yes, Slick Willie killed Glass-Steagall under orders from his bankster controllers. This created a mega feeding frenzy by the banks, because now they could use depositors' funds to make bets on the stock market. And this is what created the global financial crisis of 2008. So at that time, the too big to fail banks were bailed out, first by George W. Bush, then by Barack Obama, and through quantitative easing, which is still going on today. They then lowered interest rates to almost zero, and in some cases negative interest rates. So it's basically one big fat Ponzi scheme, and it's been allowed to continue. And so what's happened now, it's created a tsunami wave of debt, which is now coming our way. And so this leads us to this very important news report. So in 2008, the financial debacle was created by the subprime mortgage practice of banks. Subprime mortgages just means mortgages that are really dodgy, right, which are bad. They're not good. They're people that don't have jobs or have part-time jobs, and they're not likely to pay it back. So what we saw was back then banks were literally giving $500,000 home loans to homeless people who didn't even have a job. But they did this because the banks knew full well that they could never pay it back, and that was the whole point. The banks just type numbers onto a screen, and that's your loan. That's how they arrange your loan. They just type numbers into a screen. But then other people come in and build the house using their sweat and hard labour. And then the occupants start paying the bank back in real money, which they earn from work or whatever, until eventually, they default. And the bank knows this is going to happen. Because what happens then? Well, the people lose their house, the bank takes it over. So now the bank has a house that they didn't build or have to spend any money on building. They have all the money that you've already paid in mortgage payments before you defaulted. And now they get the house, the empty house, and they get to sell that or do whatever they want with it, right? So it's a win-win-win for the bank and a loss-loss-loss for the hard-working people of the world. And this is basically how they've operated from day one. Anyway, so what's going on now is a corporate version of this. So in 2008, it was the mortgage subprime collapse. Now it's a corporate subprime collapse. So this story was first broken by Zero Hedge, zerohedge.com. I highly recommend. That's a great site if you're interested in financial stuff. You'll get the truth from them. But basically they broke the story, and it was based on this IMF report. And the Zero Hedge Fund article is called "In Stark Warning, IMF Finds Over 20% of US Corporations at Risk of Default Should Rates Rise." So the IMF has had to admit that the US corporate debt has tipped at $13 trillion at the moment. In 2008, that amount was only $8 trillion. So it's gone up by 75% since 2008. And that's partly because of this quantitative easing nonsense that Obama was fully endorsing, just printing money basically, and rather than using that money to buy capital and invest back into their system, they were using it again to bet on the stock market. You know, you got to bet big to win big. That's the old joke, isn't it? Well, that's what they were doing. So now these corporations are up to their eyeballs in debt, and that's what they were calling financial engineering. You know, it also included, like, they were buying up their own stocks to increase the value of their own company and stuff like that. So effectively what they're doing is just creating more debt. They're not investing in capital or expanding or anything. So, you know, we're just going to get the same problems we had with the housing market. So now debt leverage has jumped. Debt-to-income ratios are at an all-time high, and the ability to pay even the interest on this debt is collapsing. So now many companies are unable to even borrow money to service their debts because the banks have restricted the credit. And this is what they do. They expand and restrict credit all the time. Boom and bust, boom and bust, boom and bust. And they profit from the boom and they profit from the bust. And now they're getting ready for the bust because they've restricted the income, right? Which means they want these companies to default. So like I was saying, the last time they got the homes, the houses of people, but this time they're going to get the corporations and small businesses. And they want to do this to consolidate the corporations into smaller and smaller ownership. So like the present media giants, right? There's only 6 corporations that own all the media, basically, in the Western world. And that went from 82, I think, maybe 50 years ago, and now it's down to 6. Well, they want to do this with all major businesses. And because, one of their old lord and masters, John D. Rockefeller, once famously said, competition is a sin. And they literally believe that. They want to eliminate all competition. Anyway, so in 2016, the default rate was around 3%. So that's the companies that collapsed, was around 3%. But now, only halfway through 2017, it has risen to 5%, and it's rapidly growing. The default rate for subprime corporate debt has more than doubled in 1 year. So the IMF is now saying that if interest rates climb sharply, even by a few percent, about 20% of corporations in the United States will default. So the bubble is bigger than the 2008 mortgage crisis. And to give you an idea, the 2008 debt was $1.5 trillion, and the subprime corporate debt bubble right now, halfway through 2017, is already at $2 trillion and rising. Anyway, you can see all these graphs and data, etc. for yourself. I'll put the link in for the IMF's report. But basically, the banks are still out of control. They call themselves the too big to fail. And the problem is now, since 2008, on average, they've all grown about 40% bigger since the last crisis. And that's because they swallowed up thousands of smaller banks and financial institutions. And that's part of that consolidation I spoke about earlier. So this issue is going to be way bigger than the 2008 bubble. And the global knock-on effect of this, I think, will be mind-blowing. I'm in Australia, and I know we're tightly connected with American corporations and the American economy. So chances are, if nearly a quarter of all US corporations are going to fail, you can rest assured it's going to affect Australia, and I think nearly every other country in the world, because we rely on exports to these companies, and we also rely on imports and things. And if those companies have gone, we've got no one to export to. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a global crisis, just frankly. And just speaking of Australia, staying in Australia at the moment, we are experiencing right now what the US did back in 2008 with the housing bubble. So I mean that because a recent survey in Australia showed that 57% of mortgage holders could not handle a $100 increase in their loan payments, right? Only $100. So if they have to pay an extra $100 because interest rates go up, they're not going to be able to handle it. So basically went on to say if interest rates go up by 0.5%, 1 in 8 people in Australia will lose their homes. And if it goes up to 0.75%, then 1 in 5 will default. And if you think this is not happening or going to happen, just remember that in March this year, ANZ, which is one of the largest too big to fail banks in Australia, increased their interest rates by 0.25%. So the clock is ticking on that one. This is only a matter of time. But look, all is not lost. Donald Trump actually announced that he is considering breaking up the too big to fail banks. So he confirmed this in early May in an interview he did with Bloomberg News. You can read the full transcript of that on the link. This would stop the banks from basically taking deposits and speculating on the stock markets, which would create another GFC. But will Trump get there in time? That's probably what the big question is. He needs to act quickly, really quickly, actually. But look, I just guess we'll have to wait and see. So that's basically all I'm going to cover with this at the moment. Now we'll just go to a short break. And when I return, I will be discussing the topic, what is the matrix? So hang around for that one, and I'll speak to you soon. I hope you've been enjoying the Matrix Report, but there is one thing. I really need your support. It would be great if you could just share this podcast on Facebook, Twitter, or whatever you do. But I also need financial help. So I've set up a Patreon account. You can help by becoming a patron. You can choose to donate as little as $1 per upload, capped to whatever amount you want, or make a one-off donation or a monthly or yearly subscription. I hope to add subscriber-only content in the future. So go to www.patreon.com/Danny Searle, all one word. And Patreon is spelt Patreon. Now look, I really enjoy making these podcasts, videos and writing books, but I seriously cannot continue to do them for free. it's a full-time job, and unfortunately I still need to eat and keep a roof over my head. So if you can help, please do. Otherwise, please share this podcast with as many people as you can. Every little bit helps. And as for donations, if you have made a donation in the past and you donate again, I will refund it immediately. I do not want the same people always having to be the ones to support me. It's not fair on you, but I do thank you graciously for your kindness. We've got to share the love, people. What comes around, goes around. And welcome back to part 2 of the Matrix Report. So what is the Matrix? That is the question, of course, that is posed in the movie, but it's also posed by a lot of people now in our normal sort of, environment. So the Matrix is a real thing. Basically, the world that we live in, that we call the third dimension, could be described as the Matrix. But what makes it up? Well, basically, the universe that we live in right now, including where you are right now, is part of a holographic program, I guess is the best way to put it. So just bring it down, we'll just come down to the third dimension. So the third dimension you're in right now is a designed program. It's built from geometry, basically, geoglyphs. Okay, so I'm not sure, you've heard of a cube or a sphere. These are a little bit, they're the Platonic shapes, but what we're really talking about here is geoglyphs like tetrahedrons and polygons and things like this. So basically they're the building blocks, just like Lego, and they plug together, they join together. But these building blocks are made of electromagnetic energy, right? So through electromagnetic energy, they join together, and they're used to construct a playing field, if you like. So imagine you're at a sporting event, like a big sporting stadium, and you've got those boxes, the corporate boxes. So on one level, we've created the field, okay, which the players are on, and then we've created the corporate box. But the corporate box is for the observers. They sit up there and observe the game. They're not part of it. They don't interact with it as such, but they observe it. So that's, analogous to the higher levels, different dimensions within this holographic universe. But getting back to the 3D matrix, so they've created this place, I guess you'd want to call it, which is like a field, like I said, like a game field. It's a game. And once you're inside of that field or game, like stadium, you're governed by the laws that they built into that program. So the laws that were built into this program are what scientists call the laws of physics, meaning gravity. You can't walk through walls. If you were to walk off of a tall building, you would fall to your death. You can't fly. But there's a few anomalies, and this is how we know that it's a artificial construct. And I guess one of the easiest ones to explain is gravity. Even scientists can't really fully understand what gravity is. They've got all these theories, but none of them actually are 100% verifiable. And they talk about this strong gravity and weak gravity and all these sorts of things to try and explain it away. But I guess, for in layman's terms, think of it like it takes a rocket, with God knows how much explosive power to break out of the Earth's atmosphere, but that same gravity is there and birds can fly in it. And birds are lighter and whatnot, and they use lift over their wings to fly them, but it's still gravity, right? It's, the same thing that holds us to the ground allows other things to float in the air. Why aren't they governed by the same laws of gravity? There should be just one gravity, meaning if we are stuck to the ground, then everything should be stuck to the ground. But that's not the case, okay? I mean, I could go further into it, but I won't bog down on that. It's just to give you an idea that anomalies like that demonstrate to us that this is an artificial construct. That's what it is. Who created it? I won't go into that today, but it wasn't demonic beings or nefarious beings. It was part of a bigger experiment, but like I said, I won't go into that today. I just want to explain what the matrix actually is. So it was constructed for the intent purpose of playing out emotions, to allow us to explore emotions, particularly negative emotion, because you can't experience that in the spirit plane. Unfortunately, what's happened is that the powers that be, or certain powers that be on this planet and interdimensionally, have figured out how this construct works, and they've been able to hack it. Basically, they could hack into it. They learnt how to manipulate it. So, like I was saying, it's made up of geophysical shapes, sacred geometry shapes, and those shapes are made of electromagnetic energy. So the way that you can hack the system, obviously, is to understand electromagnetic power. And in fact, the whole universe, the galaxy, solar system, everything is based on electricity, not physical matter as such. Okay, it's electricity, or more specifically, it's electromagnetic system. That's what we live in. And so that's why even your body has an aura around it, because it's part of the electromagnetic system. And what I've talked about in my books and other times, think of it like the universe is one big giant brain. That's what it is, And when you look at a brain, it's made up of all these little neurons and dendrites and things, like tentacles, like branches coming off of a tree. And everything's connected. Everything within the brain is connected to everything else, okay? And it can communicate with each other and faster than the speed of light. And this is the other thing that science is bogged down on at the moment. They've got it in their head that the speed of light is the limit of physical speed. It's just incredibly naive and idiotic to think that, when in fact in our own bodies we can produce thought faster than the speed of light. So there it is, right under their noses, that we've got examples in ourself that is faster than the speed of light, but for whatever reason, their idiotic mathematical calculations can't comprehend that. So, scientists like to have very rigid boundaries, and you do not step out of them. And that's why science can't progress at the level that it should be progressing at, because they're too rigid. But look, that's a soul age issue, and I won't get into that either. But suffice it to say, the universe is like a giant brain. Things can travel faster, much faster than the speed of light, like instant travel. If you've ever seen one of my favourite old TV shows was Stargate, SG-1, where they could travel through wormholes. They could, go 50 light years away it used to take 3.2 seconds for them to leave Earth and travel 50, 60 light years away, right? That's reality. That's basically how it works. And, in that they explain it as either going through a wormhole. If you think of it like a brain, so where your motor area of your brain is to operate your arms and legs is near the top of your head, okay? So you can get a message from the top of your head to your toe. Think of it right now. Move your big toe. How long did that take? It was instant, right? Because everything's connected. Everything travels faster than the speed of light. So getting back to our brain analogy about the universe, everything within the universe is connected. Everything is electromagnetic, just like your brain is now. As above, so below. That brain, that holographic construct, is what people refer to as God. That's what the God is that people talk to or pray to. It's a holographic brain, I guess, is the simplest way of putting it. I mean, that's a little bit simplified, but you get the idea. And really, it's, praying to that God, I guess, is like you just talking to yourself, because we're all part of it. We're all part of the brain. We're just in a different section of it. But anyway, you get the idea. So because it's all electromagnetic, once you understand how to manipulate electromagnetic stuff, you can hack it. And it's not as hard as it sounds. And this is what the elites have done. They've been trying to figure this stuff out for thousands of years. They really perfected it about 300 years ago is when they really got their head around it. And they really started to understand it. And of course, what spawned that breakthrough in their understanding filtered down into the mainstream as the Industrial Revolution. That's where the Industrial Revolution came from. And when you look at history, again, you realise that everything's not as it seems. We went through thousands of years. You just have to look at Europe. Okay, Europe went for thousands of years living a medieval existence, feudalism, the whole thing, horse and pony show, thousands of years. And then suddenly out of nowhere, overnight, the Industrial Revolution, boom. Everyone left the land, moved into cities, started manufacturing factories, steam engines, you name it. It just all exploded within a blink of an eye when you look at the whole history of Europe. So overnight, they went from this medieval agricultural society to this high-density living in cities, and factories and manufacturing plants, just like that. And then that drove then the next level of human exploration, because all these industrialists now were travelling the world looking for new raw materials that they could exploit and turn into product. And so that's how America was discovered. Like North America was discovered, or it's discovered by Europeans. It has always been inhabited. Same with Australia, New Zealand. Most of the the exploration of Indonesia, which they used to call the Dutch East Indies, and India, of course, China, Silk Road, all those sort of things. All that came out of the Industrial Revolution. And so things like you've got today that you take for granted, like coffee, sugar, salt, pepper. At one point in the 1500s, sugar was more valuable than gold bars, right? Because it was only coming from one place in the world, which was on the other side of the world in the Americas. And so it was a very rare product and highly sought after. And what's ironic is the only people that could afford it really were the rich elites. And of course, one thing they don't show you in the history books or the mainstream history books is they all had rotten teeth. Like within 10 years, they were all on this high sugar diet, and so suddenly they all had these blackened, rotten teeth. And this is why, like George Washington, for example, who came from the elites, he had wooden teeth by the time he died, all false teeth. And that's because they all fell out because he had this high sugar diet. Yet when scientists, archaeologists, they dig up these skeletons from the 13th century, they've got relatively perfect teeth. And I've seen tons of programs. Again, one of my favourite old programs was Time Team, which is comes out of the UK, where they go and they dig up these Roman remains, 2,000-year-old Roman remains in England, and they've all got really good teeth. And that's because they didn't have this high sugar diet that we all have now, right? Anyway, so I've sort of gone off off on a tangent there, but I was just trying to get back to the point that these elites, these elites I'm talking about, they're the ones that cracked the code. They cracked the code and figured out how to manipulate what we now call the matrix, the system, this third-dimensional hologram that we're in. So they've been trying... Well, not trying. They have been perfecting their hack and getting better and better and better at it. And this is why things like television and radio, Wi-Fi, internet, all these forms of communication that they invented or exploited, more so, they exploited, all work on the electromagnetic frequencies, right? So right now where you are, there is thousands of radio beams, television signals whizzing through the air, Wi-Fi, you name it, all on this electromagnetic spectrum. You can't see them, but they are there, right? Because we're in a electromagnetic world. So that's how they were able to exploit that world and tap into it. And so guys like Nikola Tesla, what he was brilliant at, he actually used to be able to visualize these tetrahedrons and polygons, these sacred geometry glyphs. He could visualize them and put them together in his mind, and once he worked out how to do it, he would then translate that into the physical realm and build these incredible electromagnetic machines. And that's why the elites shut him down. They used his technology, they exploited him for as long as they could, but he basically figured out a way of giving everyone free energy, and that's when they shut him down. They weren't having any of that. Okay. But yeah, the ability to create free energy has been around actually before Tesla, but Tesla really commercialized it, I guess is the best way of putting it. He came up with a system that could be rolled out and everyone in the world would have access to it. But of course, that's never going to happen. Not under the current management. Because you think about it, you've got a multi-trillion-dollar oil industry, petrochemical industry, which then, part of that is the transport industry, plastics industry, even Vaseline is made from petrochemicals. A lot of paints, cosmetics, thousands and thousands of things are used from the oil industry. So to switch that off, because that's effectively what you'd be doing, if you came up with a free energy device, you'd effectively be switching that tap off. And so if you're one of these elites that, you're getting $1 billion a day from it, you're not going to sit there and allow that to dry up, because what you'd be doing is rendering all transport, all machines, everything obsolete overnight. So, it's what they call disruptive technology, and that's why they won't ever allow it. It'll never happen. But if you're one of these budding home scientists and you've figured out a free energy machine, for God's sake, do not patent it. If you patent it, they will shut you down. What you need to do is put it on the internet, create a video, show people how it works, and then the blueprints, the schematics for it, you need to post somewhere that people can download and build the machine themselves to see if it actually works, right? Yeah, I know you're not going to be made a millionaire probably overnight. You will eventually, and you'll still get famous, but you need to give this technology to the planet. You need to give it to everyone. Just share it with everyone, because once it goes viral, they can't shut it down, okay? The genie's out of the bottle. It's as simple as that. So over the next few podcasts I'm going to do, we're going to start to explore this whole matrix thing and what's happening. I'm going to be talking about different news articles I see and comment on them. And for me, this is just a lot quicker than making videos, because to give you an idea, a 30-minute video, basically 1 minute of video is about 1 hour's work. So if I've got a 30-minute video, that's 30 hours work, plus or minus 5 hours. It's a lot of work. And I can't get stuff out as quickly as I'd like to. So I've decided to, as I said, start up this podcast, hopefully to get information, critical information out quicker, but also to give me a chance to explore different topics that I think people need to know about. So that's basically it for this episode. I'm trying also to keep them down to, about 30 minutes because I figure, people could listen to this whilst they're going to work, or maybe at night while you're doing the dishes, put the headphones in and have a listen. Whatever, it's up to you, but I try and keep it relatively short. I'm also open to suggestions. If there's something that you want to hear about or for me to discuss, just leave your comments and I'll try and get to them. I'm happy and open to talk about anything. So that basically wraps it up. I hope to continue doing this and I look forward to hearing from everyone in the future. So stay safe and love and light from Danny. See you later.